Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. This is Rebecca, your Vibe mentor. Welcome to another episode. I am so excited to introduce Kaitie Childs today. Kaitie is a certified functional medicine coach and somatic trauma and attachment healing specialist. She has worked with the nervous system for 13 years and helps struggling trauma healers close their stress response to manifest the life and business they crave. She blends science with spirituality for a holistic healing approach. Welcome, Kaitie. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to connect with you again and to connect with your community and share all of this goodness that we've got here for today.
Yeah. It was so fun to find you because our communities are so similar, and the way we speak about the nervous system and manifestation and abundance and stepping into your life purpose and how they're all intimately connected. And it's not something a lot of people have been talking about in recent years. So it's beautiful to be able to bring this message to the world. So where can everyone find you if they're looking to connect with you? We'll of course list the links in the description as well, but I know you're really big on TikTok and Instagram. Anywhere
Yeah.
else that you want to mention?
TikTok and Instagram are the big places to find me. So at Kaitie Childs, 2 I's in Kaitie. And I have all kinds of stuff on there to dive through.
Beautiful. Yeah. And it's always in bite-sized chunks, which is nice. So easy to consume. Beautiful. So tell me more about how you got into trauma healing and this work.
Yeah. Well, trauma healing specifically, I think anyone that gets into trauma healing has their own healing journey, that sort of initiates it. But the rest of it, the way that it kind of all came together. So I owned a wellness healthcare practice about a decade, and I co-owned a wellness healthcare practice. And the focus of that practice was on nervous system regulation, nervous system health. And then I went out and got into trauma healing because I realized that that was a huge missing piece of things. So the practice was a lot more on the science side of things, if you will. And then became a functional medicine coach and brought all of those pieces together. And then sort of in the background, spirituality was always there, right? That was always a huge piece for me. And for a long period of time, the spirituality was like a personal piece. It felt like very sacred to me, like it was like my own relationship. And then, at some point, I opened the door on that and taught spiritual growth, and then now bring all those things together and blend them all together because they're all intricately connected. I can't even imagine not not seeing them all as the same thing. You cannot heal trauma without, like it changing your spiritual relationship to yourself and to your higher power. Trauma always affects the body. It's just all connected.
And I love the physical piece and the connection to spirituality because they go hand in hand. One of the reasons why I first reached out to you, because you said you cannot heal trauma without a relationship to your creator. And that I've found to be true in my work as well. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful. And it's interesting too, studying psychology, how they kind of dance around the spiritual piece. There's a recognition of a need for spiritual health, and yet there's no measurement. So I do believe that we are waking up to the need for that spiritual piece.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that there's an awareness that it's an integral piece, kind of that in a similar way that I think the medical community knows and understands that the role of the nervous system and the role of stress is an integral piece in chronic health issues,
Yeah.
but sort of not knowing how to really guide people or how to integrate that or how those things overlap. It's kind of like if you go to the doctor, they're like, yeah, stress is bad for you, be less stressed, but don't really know how to guide you in that. And I think that's kind of the same in the therapy world. It's like, yeah, your relationship with your higher power, however you define that, is important, but I don't really know how to guide you on that path, so it's
And there's a limit to the growth that can be accomplished, right? If you're solely in the psychology world and not really implementing any of the spiritual pieces, you kind of bump up against, well, I don't know how that could happen, right? The tyranny of the how, as Tony Robbins likes to say. Whereas when you need to move beyond that, it's up to the creator, it's up to source to handle the how, right? We just have to believe. And
Mhm.
that's sort of the bridge that seems to be missing often in the healing piece.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Beautiful. Our community is filled with spiritual people, so we understand that factor. And yet there's such I like to say that the spiritual community in general has been sort of amassing all of these healing skills. Most of my friends who are awake and aware have multiple certifications, whether it's Reiki or meditation. And yet they're still very much stuck in sort of that hidden seeker phase, this fear of being seen, or certainly I can speak from experience. Yeah, I'm not pointing fingers. This is all my journey. And now, being able to speak to it. And I remember the thought of posting a YouTube video, telling people that I was spiritual. I was sort of that closet spiritual in the corporate world, putting on my business suit every day and yet, meditating and working with stones and things. And so this community very much is aware of the desire for purpose, the desire for following our path and living a soul-led or a source-led life, doing something that matters, right? We all usually have that deep desire to make a difference in the world or to help people. And yet we're so held back by the fear of being seen, the fear of rejection. Speaking our truth is very difficult because of the worry that people are going to challenge us or argue with us, or that we might do something wrong, right? Bringing together the nervous system piece and the trauma healing piece and helping us understand what is it that keeps us really stifled or playing small, really. If we're here to share our light and shine our lights, we have to be seen. So tell me more about why we get stuck in that hidden seeker phase and start to bridge how we get out.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, where to start? So the fear of being seen and helping people move through that fear of being seen is absolutely one of my favorite pieces. And that's probably that is the big fear that I help people with the most. So the fear of being seen always comes from a fawn response. So your nervous system has four main stress responses. That's a little bit nuanced, but there's four main ones. And each one of the stress responses each one is going to have a very specific fear associated with it. And there's going to be very specific limiting beliefs. A fawn response is the stress response of the nervous system that your nervous system goes into when at some point in your life, there was an experience where your nervous system said, hey, I can't fight back in this situation. It's not safe for me to fight back. It's not safe for me to run away. So the best option for me right now is to make myself smaller. Like that is the best defense mechanism that I have. Usually a fawn response begins when you're a child, right? So as a child, it's not going to be safe to, fight back, against a parent. You can't run away because how are you going to take care of yourself, out there, right? And so these are decisions that your nervous system is making on its own. Like it's not consulting your higher self. These are decisions that your nervous system is making as it's reading the situation and it's saying like, okay, this person is big and I'm small, right? Or this person has a lot of money and I don't, or this person this and this, right? So there's always this aspect of big and small. It's predator and prey. And in the fawn response, it's okay, I'm the prey here. And moving through that fear of being seen is closing the fawn response and shifting what is inside of your nervous system so that you no longer see yourself as the prey, right? So you no longer see yourself as the underdog, not being able to get ahead, which is often what's happening in the fawn response, is that there's this story of like things never working out for you and kind of like almost getting there, but not quite, like getting to the finish line, or like something always happens. Moving through the fawn response is learning how to, or part of moving through the fawn response is learning how to shift your identity to become a winner, if you will, like to where you are winning, so that you can be successful. All of the limiting beliefs connected to, this desire to shrink yourself and make yourself smaller change when you close the fawn response, because your nervous system, this is an important piece to understand too, is that when you have a fawn response, your nervous system is making you smaller to protect you. That's the way that it believes that it's protecting you. So when you are wanting to, make that post or be seen on social media or like be seen in a relationship or like, move towards your purpose and whatever that means for you, and you're struggling with that, like you're struggling to either make any action towards that or make consistent action. So sometimes it's like, you can post once, but then like you'll kind of like ghost and hide and like put the phone down and like run away, right? Or maybe you record it and everything stays in your drafts, but you're not actually posting anything, right? Or you're posting and then it just feels like it's crickets and it just feels like you're getting rejected and rejected and rejected. And it's like, what's going on here, right? All of that is the fawn response. And it's the story that, like if you were successful, then that would be dangerous. And so your system is making decisions, moving energy in a direction to manifest a situation where you stay small, right? Where you don't actually get to the other side, where you're successful, where you're seen, because your system is trying to protect you. And when you close the stress response, your system now doesn't believe that it needs to protect you in that way. So that piece is important to understand, is that it's not your fault. Like your nervous system is literally altering your perception of your reality. When you close the stress response, your perception of everything changes, and things like the road sort of widens and things feel more possible and things feel a lot easier.
Yeah. And there's often that conversation around the subconscious, right? I have a subconscious program and how elusive that can feel. And like, how do I reprogram my subconscious? Or, if the nervous system is making decisions for me and I feel out of control, right? It's not coming from my intelligent and executive functioning in the brain. It's coming from some unknown place. This kind of bridges that gap or helps us understand, how do we make that change so that we can step back into our own power and authority.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what is the role of the subconscious relative to the nervous system? And also, how does that tie into frequency and vibration? Because you talked a little bit about, maybe I'm posting, but I'm getting crickets. There's an energetic piece there where we're still not allowing that success to come in. So can you talk more about that?
Love that question. So I see the nervous system and the subconscious as intrinsically connected, right? So your nervous system is sending information to your subconscious is sending information to your nervous system. So you cannot, they work together, right? So in order, and this is a big mistake that I see a lot of people make, is that a lot of people will be looking for their limiting belief in their subconscious of like, I'm trying to manifest this success. I want to manifest my purpose. I want to manifest this thing, right? So let me find the limiting belief in my subconscious so that I can rewire that. And then the floodgates will open, right? But your system will not allow you to rewire that belief until you have regulated it in the nervous system first, right? So this is neuroscience, like it's just the way that your system works. So there has to be regulation created in the nervous system first, and then the subconscious can then rewire those limiting beliefs. And those go together, right? So because your nervous system is going to alter your perception and the way that you're reading information. So to give this a little bit of context, I'll give like a personal story. Like recently, so I have my own coach that, I work with for my own, personal healing. My neighbor, I have a fence, like a wooden fence, and my neighbor has a dog, and this dog is very friendly. Recently, I was processing one of my own traumas, and in the call, because my system was activated, I saw my neighbor's very friendly dog walking past as if it was a wolf, right? So my system was now reading the friendly dog as dangerous because I was activated, right? So the way that your system is perceiving the information very much changes based on the level of activation in your system and which stress response you have. So which stress response is open and active and your nervous system is sitting in is very much going to change the way that you're seeing information. When you have had a stress response open for a very long time, that is going to create very specific belief patterns, right? So your nervous system over and over again is reading the information in the same way. And in time, that's going to give your subconscious the same information and the same information and the same information. So that's why each stress response is going to have very similar fears and very similar limiting beliefs. Of course, there are going to be, plenty of things that, make it special to you and, make your traumas and, the way that things happened unique, right? But they absolutely go together. When you regulate and close your stress response first, then the subconscious beliefs now become very easy to rewire and change because there's nothing active in the nervous system. So the nervous system now says like, hey, this old story that we had about money, I can see it as just a story now. Like it's just words, right? Where when the stress response is open, there's activation with it, right? Money's dangerous. Like, I can't let that thing come to me because people that have money are bad, right? Or whatever the story was for you in the past, right? So when you close the stress response, now it just becomes a belief that doesn't have any active charge to it, that becomes very easy to rewire. So that's kind of, a way that I approach things that's very different than, a lot of people, is working with the nervous system first, and then, and then working with the subconscious. They definitely, they always go together and they work together. They're a team. And so then, to answer your second question, like the second part about, okay, if you're posting on social media, there's crickets, and the energetic piece of that in a fawn response, part of what's happening energetically. So I'll share this too, just so, your community knows. I know that you know. So I'm also a medium. I was born a medium. I also understand the energy system, the chakra system, and how each stress response influences the chakra system, and, which chakras get overactivated, which get underactivated. In a fawn response, one of the things that's happening is that throat chakra gets very underactivated, right? So I don't like to think of them as like on off or blocked, not blocked. I think of it as like too much energy or not enough energy, like not able to express. In a fawn response, throat chakra becomes very underactive, and that will actually change the way that it sounds when you speak. So part of your, so your vagus nerve runs the length of your spine. And one of the ways that you can tell whether or not someone has a regulated nervous system or a dysregulated nervous system is by the health and the tone of that vagus nerve. The health and the tone of your vagus nerve is definitely like one of the ways to tell or hear is through resonance in someone's voice. Yes, so much of it is energetic. So when you have a fawn response, the way that your voice gets projected is very different than the way that someone that does not have an open fawn response, their voice gets projected. So when there's an open fawn response, it's almost like there's not a vibrato, like there's no echo, or like there's no sound chamber. It's kind of like listening to an old radio that doesn't have, like, there's no bass to it, there's no treble. It's just very sort of flat. I'm very clairaudient if you can't tell. Like but when the fawn response has closed, it's like when you speak, the energy fills the entire room, right? And part of the reason that that's happening, is again because in the fawn response, part of the way your nervous system is protecting you is by making yourself smaller, right? So throat chakra gets blocked so that when you speak, your words don't have this vibration that moves, right? It falls kind of flat. So when you speak, it's like your voice, sort of goes flat. And so that's one of the big things that, makes you more magnetic and makes people sort of want to work with you, is that when your voice has that vibrato and that sort of echo to it, echo is probably a better word, like this motion to it. There's an essence of trust that comes through with that, because throat chakra and solar plexus are connected. There's a sense of trust that comes through your voice, and it's all energetic.
I can relate too, because I didn't realize this when I was young, but I was always told I speak so softly, right? And it was hard to hear me. I would speak so quietly and softly that people would really struggle to hear me. And I had to purposefully project my voice, especially if I was, in the corporate boardroom or something of that nature, where I was still shaking, but I had to really try to force it to come out. And low blood pressure, right? So that would be another one. If you look at the fawn response in animals, some animals will pretend to be dead and they can literally lower, right, their bodily functions. I don't know if I'm saying that properly, but so that's, I think, also indicative of a fawn response as well.
Yeah. So all of those things go together, right? So again, like everything is connected, right? So in a fawn response, you tend to be in a dorsal vagal response, and in a dorsal vagal response, you're gonna see lower blood pressure.
And it's interesting because fawn doesn't sound like activation, but it is, right? So when we're in that activated nervous system state, I've noticed it's very protective. It's blocking, right? It's kind of resistant. It's shutting people out. And sometimes it makes logically a lot of sense. If I'm nervous or afraid, I'm a little shaky, right? That you can feel the vibration and the frequency in that. People can feel that as well, right? So it's our whole body that is at a certain frequency or vibration based on our nervous system state that's sending out the signal to the world. So while I can be posting and I think maybe I'm even projecting, but the energy that is being felt by the other person, whether it's through a screen or not, says yay or nay, right? It says come to me, or something's not quite right. So it's very fascinating how the nervous system it's vibrating, right, at a certain frequency, whether it's fun or not.
When there's that energetic trust that's happening, right? So part of where that sort of goes wrong in the fawn response is there's this lack of trust with yourself, right? So it's not that you're not a trustworthy person, but it's that you don't trust yourself. And a huge part of where that often comes from is that in a fawn response, the way that your system is protecting you is by taking your consciousness and seeing through the lens of other people. So energetically, you are trying on other people's perceptions in order to protect yourself. So it's a social protection. And what happens is as you do that, you actually take on parts of the other person's energy, right? So you take on parts of the other person's belief systems, part of their energy system, you take on pieces of their identity. And so in time, what happens is you take on a little bit of this, the way that this person sees things, and a little bit of the way this person sees things, and a little bit of the way this person sees things. And so in time, there becomes this sort of not knowing how you see things, right? Like not being sort of solidified in, no, this is my truth, and this is how I see things, and this is who I am. And so because of that defense part of things, that's how that gets created, and that's a huge part of the pattern that working with the fawn response, rewiring that piece.
I think it's amazing how we tend to live in other people's heads. Is there a connection between us living in someone else's head and prioritizing how someone else feels, and how we in early awakening tend to sort of discredit connection, right? So a lot of spiritual people will not have it's almost like they lose the desire to go out and live life, and even just going to the grocery store becomes a task because, well, they're not aware, they're not awake, and it's almost like we somehow devalue the connection with others, and I almost wonder if that's sort of an excuse, right, that again driven by the nervous system, very subconscious. Well, I don't have to go out because they're not aware and awake, and there's no value to that connection. And in a way, it's almost like we protect ourselves from living in their head or prioritizing their perspective of us.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really good question. I love this question, actually. So definitely connected, and definitely a defense mechanism of a fawn response. So in the fawn response, part of what's happening, right? So because you're seeing through the lens of other people as a defense mechanism, what happens is your subconscious sort of becomes like this open playground, right? Where you are very suggestible to other people's belief systems, right? Because the way that you've been protecting yourself has been to take on other people's belief systems, to take on other people's mannerisms, to fit in socially, right? To try and find belonging by making yourself non-confrontational, in order to people please and not, like not rock the boat, to not be seen. And, that's the way that your system is keeping you safe. What happens, and this is also what's happening when there's a fear of posting online, is that your system, in its like sort of like deep in the bones of your system, knows that when the fawn response is very open, you don't have a way yet to protect yourself from other people's beliefs, right? So because the defense response is, if I say something, or if you say something, I'm going to just agree with you, to not be confrontational. What happens is now your system loses the ability to not just take on other people's stuff, right? So this is how you become an empath, right? Like this is what being an empath is it is a fawn response, right? And so the desire to, okay, well, now I'm in this spiritual awakening and I'm all conscious and learning all the things. Yes.
Spiritual ego's growing.
Yes, exactly. So now I'm going to isolate myself, right? It is actually a step in the right direction, like towards moving through the fawn response. It is like early fawn response, right? And the reason and the desire for that is in order to start closing these energetic boundaries and in order to stop taking on other people's perceptions, I need to isolate for a little bit first so that I can figure out what I think, right? So that I can figure out how I feel about this. And so that desire for isolation is to create this, physical separation so that you can work on those energetic boundaries, as you're, figuring out like reconnecting to yourself, reconnecting to your soul, reconnecting to your higher power, and, working through all of those pieces. So yes, definitely connected. And also as you move through the fawn response, that desire to be isolated changes because now you can, socialize with people and stay anchored into yourself where you're not just taking on, their beliefs, their energies, and you can have a difference in opinion and have it not feel confrontational, right? So it's totally okay and socially acceptable to have conversations with people and disagree and have it not be activating, right? Um, when there's a history of having a fawn response, there's a history of having confrontation being activating, right? Where, for you as the person with the fawn response, it tends to feel like your system is rattling, right? And also, there's probably a history of being met by someone that usually has a fight response, right? So being met with aggression or being met, with like very protective parts, what I say goes kind of thing. And that, that can be to varying degrees. And I say this too, it's entirely possible to have a fawn response and a fight response at the same time. Like none of the stress responses are bad. I had all four. That's why I do this. Like I understand all of them intricately. There is no good response. There is no bad response, right? But it's just that in a fawn response, you oftentimes had experiences where you were met with the shadow part of a fight response. And so there's this sort of perception that confrontation is always bad. But actually like confrontation, leads to connection when confrontation is done in a healthy way. So shared struggle actually produces oxytocin in the body, right? So you actually get to connect when there is a confrontation that's done in a healthy way with respect, right? But you have to move through the fawn response so that connection can happen in a way that feels like an opening.
Yeah. And just to reiterate what you're saying there, it creates a stronger bond, right? When we can work through something with someone. I love too that you say that the trauma response is never bad, right? No emotion is ever bad. It's always just a signpost, right? Just kind of pointing to where the work needs to be done. And this is why it's such a critical component in understanding how to navigate life, right? Like your body is creating all these emotions and we just feel at the mercy of something that we can't quite put our finger on, and yet it is tangible. It is something that we can understand, and get our heads around and understand how to work with, right? I like to say play the game called life, right? Something that is connected to what we were just speaking about is oftentimes we'll start the awakening process. We're starting our healing journey. We go into isolation. All of that is great, but we get stuck there, right? And many people don't move out of that stuck phase of isolation, and sort of the reemergence is not possible without the understanding of the nervous system and what's keeping us there. So can you speak more to sort of trauma motivation and having that drive before we go into healing, and then that feeling of crash and what's wrong with me, and I used to be able to do these things, and how do we help people sort of get back up and out of isolation and prepare and be ready to be seen and step into the purpose that we came here for?
There's sort of a couple different pathways for an awakening process. And so for some people have the experience, and this is a very common one. So if you had more of a flight or a fight response, there's that experience of, okay, I was super motivated and I was really driven, and then I started healing. And then now there's sort of this lack of motivation and feel stuck. And then some people sort of start in that like stuck phase. For both of them moving forward, you're in this, kind of isolation phase, and there's usually this in fawn response, there's always this tendency of this like insatiable desire for information, right? And where you wormhole down will vary entirely, right? But there's like this like insatiable, like I want to read this and I want to know this and I'm going to listen to this podcast, I'm going to take this course and I'm going to read this book and I'm going to like
Yeah.
learn all the things, right? And part of that is because of the phases of the stress response in your system, right? So first there's orientation, and then next there's identify and evaluate. And so the fawn response is in the identify and evaluate stage, which is where your nervous system is quite literally taking in information so that it can figure out, okay, how do I take action? Like, how do I get into action? And in order for me to get into action, I need to fully understand the landscape of everything that's happening. And so the way that that expresses for most people is, it's not in an initial trauma, right? In the way that the nervous systems were sort of, I don't want to say designed, that's not the right word, but in that neighborhood. Like if you were out in the wild, right? And like you're an antelope and a tiger comes over to get you, right? Like your nervous system would have its stress response that it goes through, right? And so that identify and evaluate stage is meant to only last like, a second or two, right? A split second. And then it decides like, okay, we run, right? But us in today in modern age, that's not what happens, right? So at some point there's a trauma and your system gets stuck in that identify and evaluate stage, which can happen if there's many things that can, make that happen. But anyway, so, the way that it looks today is let me read all the podcasts and read all the books and like learn everything that there is to know about astrology or the nervous system or spirituality or, whatever your thing is, right? And that's a huge part of the gift of the fawn response is that it's going to make you an expert at something, right? Like whatever you're diving into and learning all of the things about, right? That is without a doubt, all of the things that you're learning about is guided, right? And all of those are going to be pieces, of your purpose and, what's leading you, to your purpose. And, maybe you already have clarity on that or, on what that is, or maybe, you're still figuring that out. Where some people can get stuck is that so when the nervous system wants to move out of that identify and evaluate phase and like move into completion, what often happens, and that I see a lot of people in a fawn response do, is that there's this desire to start over. Like there's this desire to start over and like recycle old experiences to stay in the identify and evaluate stage, right? So what that can look like is, okay, well, I'm going to start this project and I'm going to get it 90% of the way. And then I'm going to need to start everything over. Like it's not perfect enough. Like this isn't my purpose and I want to help these people instead. And so now I'm going to build out a whole course doing this thing instead,
Yeah.
right? For any of you, that are listening that have already done that, like all of that is the divine order of things, right? Like as your nervous system is moving forward, that was always going to happen. Also, as you become more conscious to the patterns, you can move your system forward and say, hey, actually, I can just move this forward towards completion and take, and really take action on this thing and like get out there, right? And so when you are getting out there, part of the reason it feels so dysregulating is because that's the quantum leap. Like that's when shift nervous system states where you go from, your bottom nervous system state, which is the dorsal vagal response, where everything is about making yourself smaller, into sympathetic, where everything is about making yourself bigger. When you do that, all of the belief system, like the way that your nervous system is perceiving your entire reality changes. So now your identity changes and your belief systems are going to change. And that can feel really dysregulating because it's like, who am I? Like, yeah. And so that's kind of why people can, kind of get sort of stuck in that phase. And so it's working with all of those pieces of one, understanding, oftentimes like just understanding that that's what's happening can help a lot. Then also working with your nervous system to work on all of the pieces of the fawn response so that your system in a very embodied way can walk forward knowing, okay, I'm protected and I can feel safe as I, now post this thing or launch this thing or start the whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, putting yourself out there in whatever way that means for you.
And so the how on getting out would be something like Manifest Miracles, joining your course, understanding how to work with the nervous system. And that's why I love the term hidden seeker, right? Because that's the stuck phase. And I was there, right? Every podcast, every book, everything I could figure out. And what I was searching for was the answer of how do I keep myself safe, right? How do I move forward? What's the lay of the land? Like you say, a lot of us too want to be leaders, even though sometimes that term can be like, I don't want to be a leader. I just want to, we want to be spiritual beings who help other spiritual beings, right? That's okay. But there is a feeling, at least for me, I need to know everything to make sure that I'm justified, right? To make sure that I can qualify as valuable enough, right? And that imposter syndrome is one of those big pieces that kind of keeps us in that consumption phase. I love that you talk about how we're bringing it in and bringing it in and bringing it in. And I had that feeling of like, I'm at capacity. I can't take in anymore. And the answer to that is pouring into others. But in order to do that, we have to work with the nervous system and understand all these different states. It is true to some extent that our passions and our interests, our desires will point us towards our purpose and towards the thing that we're called to. And yet to say only do things that feel good is going to keep you stuck, because moving from the unhealed to the healed or through the states of the nervous system is not always going to be comfortable. And so many times we get stuck because we have this belief that the next right step is going to feel good. And this expectation that if it doesn't feel good, that means I shouldn't do it, and how it keeps us stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Love this question. So I think about this in a very different way than most people. So I agree 100% that in order to move forward, you have to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable feeling resistance and just understanding that the resistance is a part of the process and you're just shifting your nervous system forward. Like that's just a piece of it, right? And also, I don't do anything that I don't want to do. And that's kind of nuanced in the sense that and also, there are lots of things that I do that I'm uncomfortable doing, right? So I've reframed it in the sense that I always want to do the thing that's uncomfortable, because what I want the thing that's down the road, right? Like I want the manifestation. I want to be helping people. I want that, right? I want to be living my purpose, right? And I am, right? But there's always right. So there's also this nuance of like, I'm happy now and I'm doing it now. And also, working towards and manifesting like the next piece, right? But the way that I see things is that like, I see who I am as my higher self, right? So I don't see, when I think about my identity or who I am, like, I don't see it as just my 3D body, right? I see who I am as the greater like energetic being, right? So when I think about, okay, do I want to do this thing? Maybe like 3D me doesn't want to do that thing, but the larger me, right? Like who I am in truth definitely wants to do this thing, right? So I don't do anything that I don't want to do. And also I do lots of things that are uncomfortable and that I have resistance to, but because I think about them in a different way, right? I identify who I am as my higher self. And so it's just, so are there moments where I'm like, oh man, like I would, rather be doing XYZ instead of, this thing, like the nitty gritty, kind of stuff of running a business. Like, of course, sure that there are those moments, right? And this has been an evolution, right? And also I so deeply want the greater vision and and see myself as the grander part of myself, as my soul, that those moments just become like no, I do want this. Like I am my higher self. I do want this. Let me, I remember like so many moments of like being like, no, like let me turn the phone off, or let me turn the TV off, like let me put the phone down and let me work on this thing, because this is what I want, and who I am is the person that wants this. And like the part of me that doesn't want to do this right now is my nervous system, and I am not my nervous system. And shifting your identity is actually a huge, huge, massive piece of coming out of the fawn response and coming to see yourself as the higher version of you. Like, I don't like those words, but like as your higher self. The way that I teach it, in my course and with students, like, is that like you are a divine being of God, like you are a goddess, you are, a divine masculine energy, right? And seeing yourself as that first, and your body is just the denser energetic part of yourself, but you are one, like you are one self.
I also teach that too. And I think that's such a huge component in the identity piece is regardless of your upbringing, I was raised Christian. So the story of creation and how we were made in the likeness of our creator and animated with the breath of life. And yes, every other creation was deemed good, but we were deemed very good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The favored creation. To start to see yourself in that way can be, and I get goosebumps as I say it, it can be so shifting in your life instead of seeing yourself as the projection of that inaccurate mirror that we received from others, right? That was false. That was the hall of mirrors. To start to see ourselves accurately. And in my journey, in my healing journey, I remember sort of waking up to the fact that the ways that I would have described my personality, shy or a quiet speaker, or those were actually trauma responses.
Yeah.
That who I was very different from who I thought I was. And it's not, unfortunately, I wish I could say it was like the phoenix rising from the ashes. It wasn't. It was, I felt like this little sprout sprouting out of the ground.
Yeah.
So very vulnerable, very fragile because I just didn't know who I was. And yet we can keep ourselves safe. We can handle that, right? And so to have a new identity doesn't come from a place of, well, I'm going to call myself Sally now and I'm going to go buy an expensive car and new clothes. It's different than that. And this connects to what we were just talking about, that doing things that are uncomfortable versus doing things that I really don't want to do. You start to be more discerning when you understand how to interpret the messages coming from the body, right?
Yeah.
Is the body and the nervous system saying, don't do that thing because it's really not good for you, versus, like you said, I think of the analogy going to the gym, right? Nobody wants to tear the muscle to get a bigger bicep, right? But I want what that is going to lead to. And so I'm willing to go through the discomfort for 20, 30 minutes to get to health and wellness and happiness and all those other things, right? So perfect. How to close the stress response, right? So we've talked a lot about what it looks like, how to identify it. How do we close it? And I realize I'm kind of connecting two pieces that we had originally separated, but I wonder if they might come together. The proprioception, is that also an important piece in closing the stress response? And what else would you say?
Yeah, sort of two nuances to this. So your nervous system has 4 stress responses, and each one of those stress responses have their own sort of moment of completion, right? So you close a freeze response, and that creates a moment of completion that moves you into fawn, right? And then there's a moment of completion that happens in fawn, and that's going to move you into flight. There's a moment of completion in flight, and that's going to move you into fight. There's a moment of completion for fight, and then that's actually going to move you back into fawn. And then there's a moment of completion in fawn, and then we work with your attachment system. We're working with your attachment system sort of the whole way. And then there's a moment of completion for the system as a whole. So there are sort of all of these sort of like anchors as you go along the way. To answer the question that you asked, to close a fawn response, a huge piece of closing a fawn response is working with your proprioception system inside of your nervous system. Your proprioception system, and this is the part that is going to help you quantum leap, like it's the part that is going to help you get over that threshold from dorsal vagal into sympathetic, where you can go from, this making yourself smaller into now like being in an expanded state. So your proprioception system is the part of your nervous system that helps your body and your system know where you are in time and space, right? So if you were to close your eyes, it's the part of your system that would say like, hey, my hand's over here, my head is here, right? So it's like how your body has this awareness of where you are. When you have a fawn response, this seeing yourself through the lens of other people, and what this often looks like is like when you post something on social media, you might look at the photo or look at the post and look at it as if you're the person that you think is going, that's going to be looking at it. And maybe it's a specific person, or maybe it's like your audience, sort of like, as a whole. You'll read text messages as if you were, the person that you're sending it to, emails, right? And so when you do this, you are disorienting your proprioception system, because your proprioception system says like, well, wait a minute, where am I in time and space, right? Like what are we doing? What's happening, right? And so that's part of what's recreating this. Okay, let's identify and evaluate what's going on here, right? So in a fawn response, there tends to be this embodied experience of like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, what am I doing? Like, where am I? And it can even show up as like, like in big ways of like, what's my purpose? I don't know. Like, I thought it was this thing, but now I'm like over here and I'm thinking it's this thing, but I don't know. And it feels kind of abstract, and like all of the pieces are moving, right? Or it can show up in like, you walk in a room and you're like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I here? Why did I come in here? Right. And so there's this sort of experience of sort of always feeling a little bit disoriented, or like you don't kind of know where you are in time and space. The reason that that's important is because when your system doesn't know where you are in time and space, it doesn't know what reality you're in. And so, because your nervous system is the tool that your soul uses in order to manifest, it's going to be very difficult for you to create your next reality when your nervous system doesn't know what reality you're in, because you're stepping into the lens of other people. You're stepping into other realities. It gets very difficult for your system to know, I am here, and this is what's real, and this is what's true. And this is what I'm creating, and this is what we're going to create, and to be able to hold the energy until that thing comes to fruition, right? So whenever you're manifesting, you're taking energy and you're like moving it through your chakra system, and you're giving it density, right? So it's an idea, and then you're seeing it, and then you're speaking it, and then you've got passion, and then like you're believing in it, and you're, creating it, and then it's manifest. It's like tangible, right? You've brought it into the real world. In a fawn response, it gets stuck and it doesn't become tangible like in the real world, which is why there's like this experience of feeling like the underdog, or like you never become, like you're never successful, or like you're not reaching the level of success that you want, is because your nervous system loses its ability to condense energy when the proprioception system is off. So repairing proprioception is a huge, 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 massive part of closing the fawn response. There is so much that goes into that. Two things that you can do, to help with that. One, when you notice that you are, okay, like looking at a post or reading a text message, or right, and seeing through the lens of someone else, or even if you're like driving the car and you're like, having this like you're talking to someone in your mind, right, or like you're like having a conversation, right, like it's
Yeah.
almost like scripting a movie and you're like having a full-on conversation in your mind, right? Like as soon as you notice that you've gone into any of those patterns, take a deep breath and bring your consciousness back into the seat of your body, right? So, and you can like literally see it as like bringing and calling your energy back to you, and you're placing it in your solar plexus. And imagine it like yellow light, and you're, moving it down your body. And then you can see it as like a ball of yellow light, and like you're placing your awareness and your consciousness like back in your body, in your reality, in your perception system, right? So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing is, if you are in a place where the thoughts are just like all over the place, right? Like there's like, if there's a lot of activation going on, and there's a lot of like rumination of like, well, maybe this, if I had said this and they had done this, and right, like if it's moving too fast for you to feel like you can be able to do that, connect to sensation, and specifically connect to sensation either on the bottom of your feet or on your hands. So your hands and your feet are going to have the most proprioceptive information for your body. So take your shoes off, walk on, like a rug or an area of your house that has texture to it. And that's going to start to wake up the proprioception part of your system. It's going to give it sort of more information that's going to help the mind be less active. Another thing, I'll tell you a third thing. Hold on, let me grab this. So I sit Like, so whenever I'm speaking, like on a Zoom or with a client, I have one of these underneath each one of my feet. I don't know if you can see this, but it's like a
Yeah.
texture ball. So in order to give my nervous system information while I'm right now on, this Zoom call with you about like, hey, I'm here and I am me, and that's an image of me. That's not who I am, and that's Rebecca, right?
Mm,
I have my feet on, each one of my feet on this, and I'm just like moving my foot on it so that my nervous system is getting information about like, hey, we're here.
right.
This is where I am, right? So those are a couple things, that people can do. There's a lot more that goes into it, but those are a couple pieces that,
It was
yeah.
funny because before meeting you, I didn't understand that. I certainly see a lot of disassociation from the body. Oftentimes, especially with new clients, I will not even be able to start to do the trauma work because they're so incapable of being in the body. Right. And
Yeah.
so then the task then is just go about your life, feeling your body, start to notice, when you drive down the road and that guy turns left in front of you, what does your body do? Right. When I drink the hot tea, feel it. Right. So just coming back to the body is often a very difficult thing for people. And again, we in the spiritual community, we glorify meditation and astral travel, and we're out here, right? It's a feeling of coming home. Like literally, people will tell me all the time, is probably one of the most common things I hear when they heal, when we are, spending time in the body, and the trauma response closes and there's a release from the body. I'll ask, like, how do you feel? And they're like it's home, like. And oftentimes, people will say, I want to go, back to Sirius or whatever, planet they believe they're from, which I'm not against, but
Yeah.
it's sometimes we can find the feeling of home within us. We don't have to wait until we go back to wherever we came from. And just on a personal note, I didn't realize I was doing this until I met you. In my healing sessions, I don't know if I can explain it, but I'm pressing my feet on the legs of my chair so that my leg then presses against my desk.
I
And
love
it's
that.
right. And I'll sort of get the guidance, like make sure your feet are on the ground. But my habit is I keep pulling it back and pressing against. And I think that's likely just the body trying to stay
Just work through
here,
the process. Yeah, yeah,
right, to ground for the client and to hold that space. So thank you for
yeah.
giving me permission to continue to do
Yes, yes.
it.
That. Yep. Follow your body, it knows.
Beautiful. So the somatic piece in your work, obviously there's the cognitive understanding. How do you address, because the body keeps a score, we have to work with the somatic healing piece. How do you address that in your course and offering?
Yeah. So it's heavily somatic. There's nervous system exercises. So each stress response, right? So because each stress response is going to have specific fears and specific patterns, as people move through the course, there's specific somatic nervous system exercises tailored to the specific fears and specific limiting beliefs and, patterns that are created in each one of the stress responses. So everything is, like, okay, let's move through freeze and all of the patterns of freeze, and like taking that somatically through your body, like track the sensation as you feel. So just to give it a little bit of context, so specifically in a freeze response, there's this fear of going back, right? So that part is universal. The part that will vary will be what you're afraid of going back to. So it can be like having a fear of going back to a time when you were really sick. It can be a fear of having a time of like going back to a time when you were financially struggling. It can be a fear of going back to like a toxic kind of relationship, right? So what the thing that you're afraid of is going to vary, but it's always a fear of going back, right? That is what is keeping you stuck, right? So it's like in a freeze response, safety is in not moving, right? And then there's this fear of like, okay, but if I break out of this, then I'm going to go right back. And so let me just stay here, right? So there's all of these somatic, pieces of, okay, let's work with that system, like that pattern that's like pattern that is in your system and in your subconscious, and work through those beliefs and feel and track the sensation in your body and allow it to deactivate. It becomes now safe, right? And so we do that through each one of the stress responses with the fear, right? The specific fears of each one of them, and all of the patterns and energy, like the way that it sort of spawns off from the perception system of each one.
And then The final piece of closing the stress response, this was another one that just got me super excited because I've always had that natural, I think part of empathy, right? Part of high sensitivity, also trauma responses, which by the way, please, anyone in the community, don't take that personally. It doesn't minimize your empathic abilities or the superpower that is high sensitivity. It doesn't matter where it came from, right? But because I was super sensitive, I noticed what I put in my body and how it felt very, very early on. And I was told I could only have one orange. When I just wanted all the oranges and none of the, the noodles and the canned soup or whatever. But tell us more about the physical piece. I think this is your secret sauce, right? That functional medicine piece that you bring to this, and how detoxing is so important, that we can do so much of the healing work, the cognitive work, and maybe we even learned about the somatic work, but we tend to stop there. And how important is that physical piece in completing the healing process?
Yeah, it's huge. That's one thing that I commonly see with people too, is there's like this huge focus on either just on subconscious and not the somatic piece, or there's this huge, focus on the somatic piece and, understanding that like, okay, trauma, lives in the tissues of the body. But the big area that I see that most people are missing and, that I think is kind of the emerging field is what's happening in the cells of your body. So every cell of your body has its own little nervous system, if you will, right? So as above, so below, there's a nervous system for your body, and then there's a sort of nervous system for your cells. And so inside of the cell, what's happening inside of the cell is going to affect the nervous system of the cell, and it's going to affect whether or not there's a stress response open or not in the cells of your body. So if there's a detox issue, and we'll talk about a number of things that can create that, because oftentimes people are having detox issues or have a toxicity in the body and don't know that they do. If you feel stuck and you have a freeze or a fawn response and there's a toxicity in the body, you cannot close your stress response without closing the stress response in the cells of your body first. Because everything is connected, the cell stress response isn't able to loop forward and move forward. The stress response in your body cannot loop forward. So you might be hiring a business coach and doing this thing and that thing, but if you're not moving these things together at the same time, it's going to be extremely, extremely, extremely difficult for you to move forward until you bring all of those pieces together, because your nervous system is going to keep protecting you. Part of the reason that your nervous system might be protecting you is because it might be saying, we don't have the energetic resources in order to be able to move forward, right? So part of what your nervous system is reading is not just, hey, is it safe for me to be seen? And is it safe for me to post this thing? It can also be, hey, cellularly, we are under such a constriction here because there's so many toxins in the body that we just literally don't have the bandwidth to create the energy for you to go do this thing. So we're going to keep you here, right? Unfortunately, I think that there's a lot of people today that are in that space and just have absolutely no idea that they're in that space, because there are so many toxins today. Like, I think there's also this misconception that, well, my body has its own detox system, and so my body is just going to like detox everything out for me, so I don't have to. And that's a big misconception, because our system was designed, right, to detox things out. But the rate of technology has not tracked alongside our body's capacity to detox out plastics that are in water. They just did a study. There's 200,000 microscopic parts of plastic inside of a plastic water bottle, and that's one water bottle. Your body doesn't know what to do with that. And so we're inundated with so many chemicals and plastics and toxins, and it literally rains glyphosate now. And it's like there's so much out there that it's hard to not be exposed to things. And two, if there's a freeze or a fawn response, so if you're in a dorsal vagal response, there's always going to be detox issues, because part of what's happening is as your nervous system goes into this contraction, your lymphatic system also goes into the same contraction. And you can think of your lymphatic system as sort of like the plumbing system of your body, right? So it's like the water plumbing system that's going to help drain all of these toxins out of your body when everything's working well and you're not like in an environment where you're getting all of these toxins. But when your nervous system is in this contraction, the lymphatic system also goes into this contraction. And so now what happens is instead of water being able to move through the lymphatic system, at like a full hose, you can kind of think of it like a garden hose. If there's, no kink in the garden hose, then the hose has like full flow and there can be distance for the flower hose, right? But if there's a kink anywhere in that hose, now it's like there's a slow trickle of water. And that's what's happening when you have a freeze and a fawn response, is that your lymphatic system almost has like it's not a literal kink in your system, right? But it's this contraction that's happening in the nervous system is happening in the lymphatic system that's creating this sort of slow trickle effect in your lymphatic system. And in time, the combination of being exposed to more chemicals and having a contraction in your lymphatic system, the combination of the two is going to create an accumulation of toxins. At some point, the body starts to sort of like lose places to hide, like hide these things, right? So it can be environmental toxins and plastics. It can also be mold. So if you were exposed to mold, even if it was like mold from 20 years ago, like some dingy college dorm, right? That doesn't detox out of your system. That stores in the tissues of your body. So there's mold, there's heavy metals, there's parasites, there's all kinds of things. What can often happen is that those things can be in the body, and then either an event happens that's dysregulating in the nervous system, and then now your whole system kicks into overwhelm where it puts you in this feeling of like feeling like you're stuck or like you can't move forward. So that can be one experience, or it can just be where you feel fatigued, you feel like you have some brain fog, you've got anxiety, feeling some feelings of depression. The way that things happen is it's going to affect your mental and emotional state, and it's going to affect your capacity to move forward towards your purpose, because your system is going to say, like, we just literally don't have the energetic resources here.
Yeah, you mentioned the cells and the mitochondria converting light into energy.
Yes.
And the connection, right, with intuition. So feel free to speak to that.
Yeah. So the nervous system inside of your cells is your mitochondria. And what your mitochondria, what they are actually doing is they take light. So light from the ether integrates into your nervous system. So your chakras, like integrate into your nervous system. There's like a bundle of nerves over each chakra, and all of that energy then flows through your nervous system. And then from your nervous system, there's a nerve cell going to every single cell in your body. That light moves into the cell that then moves to the mitochondria, and the mitochondria are, the nervous system of the cell, and their job is to take that light and convert it into energy. They are only able to do that when their stress response is not on. So if their stress response is on, instead of creating energy for the body, which then creates growth, right? It puts you in this expansive pattern. When they're not able to do that, they go into protection, right? And so now they're not converting light to energy. And now their job is, hey, alert the immune system and tell the immune system that something's wrong here. Like something's up. Immune system, you need to figure out what's going on, like what's up here, right? Which is why it's so common to see when people have had trauma, right? Specifically like childhood traumas, if you have a high ACE score, why traumas eventually in the body tend to become chronic illness is because of that switch that happens. So the mitochondria are no longer able to convert light into energy, and instead start telling the immune system to find the problem, and defend and protect. And so the effect, for you as a person becomes short term. You'll feel depressed, you'll feel like you're fatigued, like you don't have a lot of energy, you'll struggle with motivation, and then long term you're going to start to see things happening in the body, diseases, chronic illness, things start to pop up. As that process happens and is present for long enough, the body will begin to be affected in a very long-term way. And also when that happens, because your body now loses its ability to process light, the experience for you is feeling disconnected from your soul. It's feeling disconnected from your higher power, because you no longer have access to the way that your body processes. And light is how there's an energetic communication between you and your soul, between you and God, spirit, source, universe, whatever word works for you. And so your intuition, so much of your intuition comes through the mitochondria's ability to be able to process light. So your mitochondria are actually passed down through your mother's line. Your intuitive gifts are passed down through your mother's line, but like the 3D place where you inherit them is from your mitochondria. As you close the cell stress response and as you change the landscape of what's happening within the body, more and more of those cells get to turn back into growth mode. Now it becomes safe to be seen. You can go into this expansive state. Your intuition opens, your nervous system starts to regulate. You feel more connected to your soul. You have more clarity about what your purpose is. And I'll say too, connected to, if you're struggling with like, what is my purpose? So common if you're struggling with being able to identify what your purpose is. And when I say that, like your purpose is always like to feel joy, right? To be expansive, right? But like the sort of like 3D, how can I be in service of others in a way that feels fulfilling and joyful to me, right? Getting clarity on what that, piece is for you. When the mitochondria in your cells, when they're in that protection mode, what happens is your cells, in essence, lose their purpose within the constructs of what's happening in the body. There's something called cellular light, and it's where your cells have the ability to also communicate with each other. When you can process light, your cells can communicate with each other. And then again, as above, so below, right? You have the ability to communicate with your, higher self, your higher power, through light, through energy. When that gets turned offline, not offline, it's not an on-off switch, it's like a volume dial, right? Like it's like it's a percentage, right? But when you start to lose access to that ability, you lose that, your cells lose that ability to communicate via light. And so their experience is, okay, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know, like, what are you doing over there? Like, what are you doing over there? I don't really know, right? And so that's part of what creates the disease process, right? Is there's this like lack of harmony within the body because none of the cells know what they're supposed to be doing. It's like, who's running the show here, right? Because the light and then for you as the being is there's this experience of like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Right. So it's the same experience for your cells and for you as the being. Everything is connected.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I love the connection to purpose, right? We can't quite access it until we put all of these pieces in place.
Yes.
And of course, then the next question is, how do we cleanse, right? What's the fastest way to detox? And is there a certain order of operation that we should move into that so that we are not moving too quickly, overwhelming our system?
Yeah, there is an order of operations to detoxing. There's detoxing mold. I'm like trying to decide how deep I want to go in, but kind of like detox mold and mycotoxins first, and then parasites, and then work with repairing and restoring the gut microbiome, and then you go into heavy metals, and then things like co-infections from Lyme, and things like that is kind of the order of operations of things. Before you do any of that, I always, advise to open drainage pathways first. So you want to make sure that your lymphatic system is, right. So unkinking that garden hose so that when you do, start to detox all of these things, they have a way to flow out of the body so that you're not creating inflammation, right, which can create some, short-term dysregulation. So you want to organize all of the pieces so that you're not creating, any inflammation, right? So opening drainage pathways first, and then doing things in an order to allow things to drain from the body, like through the path of least resistance, if you will. Something that I definitely see a lot of people come to me when they've not done detox appropriately, and they're like, I did this thing that I saw online, and like it made me flare up or whatever, right? Like you want to, and that's not everyone's experience, but that can be the experience if you're someone that has, chronic illness or your body is very sensitive. It's completely safe to do a detox. You definitely want to detox. It's just making sure, that drainage is open first and that you're doing it in the order of operations and that you're listening to your body and that you're moving slowly as you go through that. I do have a free resource on how to open your drainage pathways to prep for a detox, and then some other things that you can do to help close the stress response in the cells of your body. Doing a 5-day fast, doing a 5-day water fast will also help sort of support the mitochondria and help them loop over. So doing a 5-day fast is just literally you're just drinking water for 5 days. Definitely consult your doctor if you have specific health things. I always instruct people to work up to 5 days, so you wouldn't just like, cold turkey and then go into, a 5-day water fast, right? So, you could start with 12 hours and then go to a 24 and then go to a 48, right? And then go to a 36, right? So you're incrementally, moving it up and you're giving yourself space in between each one of those, things. So I've worked with clients before who've like, tried to do like 24 hours and then like wait like a day or two and then like do a 48. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like,
Enough time.
that's not enough time. Give your system a moment to recover and be like, oh, okay, we did that and everything was okay. Like give your cells the ability to feel the effects of the benefits of it and kind of allow things to settle. When you're doing a 5-day water fast, a big piece of it that's super important is to make sure that you're eating either Himalayan sea salt or like sea salt, right? Like mineralized sea salt. You want to make sure that you're having the electrolytes and the minerals so that all of the physiological processes in your body can still happen while you're in the absence of food. And that will also make a lot of the symptoms that some people experience doing a fast kind of go by the wayside because your body's not having to extract minerals from elsewhere in the body in order, to just be able, to do its sort of, basic function. So definitely include sea salt in there and go one step at a time. And I will say there's definitely a mental component to this. Like whenever I first mention it, people are like, that lady is off her rocker. What is she talking about?
5 days.
Yeah. But and then people eventually get on board and they're like, that was amazing. So yeah, so that's a big piece. And then also red light therapy is really great for mitochondria. And sunlight first thing in the morning is also really good for mitochondrial health. So those are kind of some pieces. And of course inside of my course we go into all of the pieces and put it, show you how to do all of that like in a step-by-step way, but to give you some tools that you can use here. Those
Yeah.
are some.
And it's probably important to note too, there's an order of operation to trauma healing in general. That if you are completely unfamiliar with somatic healing, you've not really worked with your childhood traumas or any trauma in general, and if you try to jump right into fasting, you're likely going to struggle. It's likely going to be pretty triggering for the nervous system. When you fast, things are brought up for processing. So if you've not dealt with or addressed anything prior to fasting, it likely is going to move things too quickly and be overwhelming. I could speak from experience. A 3-day fast. Although I was in the midst of the trauma healing, it still was too much for my system. And again, that lymphatic piece and working up to it. So do your research around fasting, reach out to Kaitie, get support. Don't try to do it alone. And also something else that you speak to often too is piecemealing, right? Trying to use this nervous system regulation piece and this diet piece and this somatic piece. They're very much as an order of operation to addressing all of this. So if you have tried something and it didn't work, it's likely because we're not following the body's process and really addressing one. Feel free to expound on that if you feel necessary.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Yeah, I think that's one of the big pieces that I see where people end up having a really frustrating experience in their healing journey. Because I think there's kind of sort of fundamentally two different ways to look at healing, and to look at regulating the nervous system. And I think what a lot of people out there, teach and share are like, hey, here's this tool and here's this tool. And people, will, sort of like collect all of these tools, like save them on their like TikToks and their Facebooks and or on their Instagrams and all of that's, great. And, and I'm so glad that all of that is out there, right? I'm not knocking that in any way or any capacity, right? However, the goal of that sort of mindset is let me just create safety in this moment. Like, let me just settle things for this specific moment, right? And kind of where I come from and, this sort of like other school of thought is create regulation for your life. right? Like, let's make this thing lasting, right? Like, let's close this response and make this a permanent transformation versus, let me regulate in the moment and, try and protect and avoid these triggers and like, move through life in this way where it's like, I'm always going to have these patterns and I just have to figure out how to live with them versus let me just deactivate the whole thing and not have these patterns. That doesn't mean that like that the growth ends or that there's like some end point or anything like that, right? There's always more room for growth, but you get to get out of survival, right? Like you get to get out of survival, right? And that's what happens when you close the stress response is that you get to get out of survival where you're like, there's overwhelm and I need this tool and what do I have to do?
Right.
Right? Like that part gets to end, right? And so I think there's two fundamentally different schools of thought. And the way that I have always approached everything has been like, let me get out, right? Like I valued freedom so much, because of my own, specific trauma history where like it just made me value freedom. And so for me, freedom was like being free of all of these patterns, like all of these trauma patterns. Like I just had so many of them. Like I
Yeah.
just wanted to, be free of them. And that is absolutely, absolutely possible. So moving through the order of operations and working with your nervous system to take it through, through the stages so that it can reach completion.
Yes. The opposite of survival is thriving. And I think that's what
Yes.
we're all looking for. That's probably the one thing that we can all share is a
Yeah.
thriving. So beautiful. So I do need to be mindful of time, but if we have just another minute to talk about wealth, abundance, money, it's a tough topic in the spiritual community that
Yeah.
there's so many beliefs around it not being spiritual, or maybe I'm superficial for wanting it. And yet when it boils down to it's an energy and it's
Mhm.
an energy to facilitate the person, right? And
Mhm.
so when you are a kind person, you have the ability to be more kind to more people when you have more money. I find that if you have experienced trauma, you likely already have a very high level of integrity, right? You're already being driven intrinsically towards doing the right thing and being a good person. And so there should be less fear around money. And
Mhm.
I think it's important that the world's resources be stewarded by people with high integrity, right? That the more of us that are abundant, the more good we can do in the world. And so I think it's really important. Your purpose can reach more people and help more people the more money you have. Speak, if you can, a little bit about why we struggle with money and how we can start to move through that. And likely it is partially driven by trauma, but if there's more to add, I'm sure the community would appreciate that.
Okay. I love this piece. It's definitely connected to trauma, right? So when there is a trauma, right, it's going to create a contraction in the system. If you have a freeze or a fawn response, it's going to create a contraction in the system, right? A contraction in the system is always going to create the experience of scarcity, right? And that experience of scarcity is going to manifest somewhere in your life. It's going to create an inability to receive, right? Somewhere in your life, right? And so for some people, that's an inability to receive love. For some people, that's an inability to receive money, right? The way that it's going to, express is going to vary, but a very common one is where it's going to create difficulty receiving with money, so definitely trauma related. Another way that it's trauma related is that when there's a freeze or a fawn response, there's this fear and sort of resistance to like reclaiming your power, right? Or like there's this dysfunctional relationship with power, right? And again, it's because there was an experience at some point where there was this like predator prey dynamic of this person is more powerful and I'm less powerful. And so, in order for me to be good, I'm going to stay in this space and this person is bad, right? And so, oftentimes, there's this story that needs to get, rewired. Around money being bad and people, with money being bad. And when it's connected to a trauma, the trauma that created that belief system has to be moved through your system, right? That trauma that opened and didn't close is the trauma that needs to be moved through your system in order to change the way that right? So you can, I think at this point, probably most people have already heard like, like people, not all people with money are bad, or like those things, right? But the reason that like the words don't land in and become truth for you is because your nervous system still has the embodied experience and like the embodied truth of, hey, no, actually, like people with money are bad, and I'm still keeping myself small from people with money, because they're bad, and I'm good, and and so I'm over here and I'm going to keep myself small because, making myself be seen, right? This is, an expansion, right? And so allowing yourself to receive money would be an expansion, right? It's a way of allowing yourself to be seen. It's a way of, stepping into your light. It's a way of, coming into your power, right? And so, and even too, like on the detox piece, like even your cells are in scarcity, like when there's a toxicity, right? And so I share that to say that like all of these things go together, right? They all like click over together. So I look at money very differently. So I'll share, a little bit of, my own personal story. So I struggled with my relationship with money for a very long time and allowing myself to receive money. I had an essay when I was 17 from someone who was very, very wealthy. And so, what my system learned was, not only are people with money are bad, my system learned people with money are dangerous. Like, that is life threatening. Do not let money come anywhere near you. So I had a freeze response towards money, right? So it wasn't just, so you can have a fawn response towards money where it's just like, no, that's bad. Like don't let yourself be seen. And or, you can have a freeze response towards money, which is what I had. And it, so it can vary a little bit. And, that's part of what I help people identify is like which stress response do you have money tied to, and how do we reorganize that so that it can now become safe for it to come to you. So because I had a freeze response connected to money, I had money and death wired together. And I manifested in some really, really wild things in starting my business, pursuing my purpose. At some point along the way, for a long time, I was like, what's the limiting belief? And like
Yeah.
trying like I'd read all the money books and like take all the money courses, and none of that shit worked because it was not a belief system. It was a stress response locked in my nervous system, and nothing was going to change that
Yeah.
until I closed the stress response. And when I closed the stress response, my business opened up, right? So I had been sharing on social media for a long time, and I had good traction on social media, but there was a period of time, where I had lots of views, but I wasn't yet seeing that where it was actually converting. I wasn't allowing myself to receive money. A couple things had to shift. So instead of connecting money and death, I connected money to love, right? So I intentionally paired money to love, and then instead of focusing on money when I was growing my business, and instead of focusing on when I was filming videos for TikTok or Instagram or whatever, I wasn't thinking about the followers, and I wasn't thinking about the money, and I wasn't thinking about the launch. I was thinking about the people that I'd be helping. Like I focused 100% on service, and I had to take it to the level of like imagining specific people, not some like abstract avatar, but like specific people and the ripple effect that would happen in their life, what would happen for their children in them working with me, like what would change in their relationship with their partner, right? And I had to spend time in the energy of that in order for me to even be able to like launch. Like anytime I would launch, my whole system would like shake and rattle, and so like focus 100% on service, and connected money and love together, right? So I see God as the source. I like to use the word God. If the word God doesn't resonate for you, use source, spirit, like universe, whatever works for you. I see money as coming from God, right? God is my father. The universe is your father, right? Your father, right? In like masculine and feminine energy dynamics, you are provided for from the masculine energy, right? God provides for me, and one of the ways that God provides for me, is through money, right? And there's an energetic exchange, right? So I allow God to love me when I receive money, right? So I'm allowing God to love me in the receiving of it. And then as I'm helping people, right, I help people heal trauma, right? I am giving you love, right? Like I am helping you move from fear towards love as you edit and, change your energy and all of the trauma patterns in your system, right? So I've made money this continuous flow where it's a continuous flow of love. And so I focus on the love that is coming to me and flowing from me. And money is just the 3D representation of the energetic flow that's happening between me and my clients and me and my community. And so I think I look at money in a very different way, and I look at it in that way because of my trauma history. Like I had to make it be love because the incidents that created it was so not loving that that was what was blocking it. So I had to make it be about something else. So, whatever it is that you're struggling with, right? It's looking at, how do we reframe and restructure those pieces. And if you like money and love connected together, feel
A good one.
yeah, it is a good one, right? I was guided to do that. Like I did not come up with that. I was absolutely given that. And it's what I teach inside of Manifest Miracles is how to connect money and love together, and then how to connect freedom to love and to money to become free of, all of the patterns, and how to actually do that in your system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see how that would work for a lot of people too, just being that God is love and love is everything, right? Love is really what it's all about. So there's no greater anchor than love. And that's such an important piece too for people in this community who want to step into their purpose, who desire to have a fulfilling life and help people. You can find your purpose and still struggle to be successful if you are struggling with your money relationship. So they go hand in hand, right? And that's why I love that you call your program Manifest Miracles, because it's perfect, right? You're manifesting everything that you deserve, your abundance birthright, and your ability to pour into others the beautiful love that we all are seeking at the end of the day. So take a minute to just tell us a little bit more about your course and where people can find you and how they can continue the conversation with you.
Yeah. So you can find me on TikTok and on Instagram at Kaitie Childs. We have a free training on how to close your stress response for more information on that. And then we have our course, Manifest Miracles, and it takes your entire system through that order of operations and, all three of those pieces of the subconscious reprogramming, the somatic piece and the functional medicine piece of the detox. And I feather it all together. So all you have to do is one lesson at a time, like one thing at a time. And every lesson, there's everything that you need encapsulated in that little lesson, right? So it helps, so it eliminates that overwhelm, right? So you only ever have to do the next piece. And the other piece, that we teach you how to do in Manifest Miracles is so in addition to all of those pieces, part of the magic of it is we're also teaching you how to manifest in these restorative experiences to help neutralize the energy of your traumas, right? So there's all of the grounded nervous system tools and, neuroscience and, reprogramming your subconscious and the functional medicine pieces, like all of that grounded stuff. And then also, like, why not just ask the universe, ask God to give you a restorative experience that's going to neutralize, that energy. So a restorative experience is always like the missing piece that wasn't there, in the trauma. So as you're walking your nervous system through, there's also this like really cool experience of having these like amazing synchronicities and like angel numbers and signs and, and these restorative experiences where you just couldn't have planned, like how it comes together. And two, you do not have to know the trauma that you're healing. A lot of people ask that, and you don't have to know the trauma. You don't have to know what the restorative experience is. Like you don't have to know any of that. And we teach you how to just ask for it and how to walk forward listening to your nervous system. So all you're doing is just walking forward one step at a time, and it all comes together, and it's really beautiful to watch it unfolding for people. It's really, really cool. On my end, on both ends, but on my
I would agree. I would agree. I think, even Gabor Mate talks about how the world is traumatizing today. So this is a massive leap forward for humanity. And like you said, we're healing generations going back and we're healing generations going forward. So I get covered in goosebumps when we think about just that one person we just worked with. How many thousands did we actually touch? And for those of you who want to step into your purpose, you have something equally as impactful and as important. The world needs the special gift that only you can offer. So please come share your light. No more hiding. There are beautiful people like Kaitie and I who want to love on you and support you and be there for you. And you can do this. We now know what it was that was getting in the way, and there's nothing left in the shadows anymore. So light is possible. Thank you so much, Kaitie, for being here with us today. Thank you for your gift to humanity.
Thank you for your gift. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. And, thank you so much to your community for being here and for listening. And, if you have any questions, please reach out. Just thank you. I'm so grateful for this space and and to connect with you and someone again who's like-minded and brings in all of the pieces together. It's nice to to have like the spiritual component and the grounded the science and the woo-woo together.
Yes, yes. They never really were separate, were they?
No, they never were. People just tried to keep them separate. They were always the same.
We did that as humanity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. It was a pleasure, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.